Chapter 9. The Path of Compassion. Siddhartha and Yasodhara's wedding took place the following autumn. It was an occasion of great joy and celebration for the entire kingdom. The capital, Kapilavatthu, was decked with flags, lanterns and flowers, and there was music everywhere. Wherever Siddhartha and Yasodhara went in their carriage, they were greeted with resounding cheers. They also visited outlying hamlets and villages, bringing gifts of food and clothing to many poor families. King Suddhodana supervised the building of 3 palaces for the young couple, one for each season. The summer palace was built on a beautiful hillside in the highlands, while the rainy season and winter palaces were in the capital city. Each palace had lotus pools, some for pale blue lotuses, some for pink, and some for white. The couple's fine garments and slippers, and the fragrant sandalwood they lit every day, were ordered especially from Varanasi, the capital of the Kazai kingdom to the southwest. King Suddhodana was at peace, now that Siddhartha had followed the path he had wished his son to follow. He personally selected the finest musicians and dancers in the kingdom to provide continual and pleasant entertainment for his young son and daughter-in-law. But happiness for Siddhartha and Yasodhara was not to be found in a pampered life of wealth and status. Their happiness came from opening their hearts and sharing their deepest thoughts with each other. They weren't moved by exquisite and savory foods or fancy silken clothes. While they could appreciate the artistry of the dancers and musicians, they were not carried away by the pleasures they offered. They had their own dreams: to find answers concerning the spiritual quest and the renewal of society. The following summer, as they were driven to their summer palace by faithful Channa, Siddhartha's boyhood attendant, Siddhartha introduced Yasodhara to places throughout the kingdom she did not yet know. They stayed several days at each location, sometimes spending the night in the homes of country folk, sharing their simple foods and sleeping upon their woven string beds. They learned a great deal about the way of life and the customs of each place they visited. At times, they encountered terrible misery. They met families with 9 or 10 children, every child racked with disease. No matter how hard the parents toiled day and night, they could not earn enough to support so many children. Hardship went hand in hand with the life of the peasants. Siddhartha gazed at children with arms and legs as thin as matchsticks, and bellies swollen with worms and malnutrition. He saw the handicapped and infirm forced to beg in the streets, and these scenes robbed him of any happiness. He saw people caught in inescapable conditions. In addition to poverty and disease, they were oppressed by the Brahmins, and there was no one to whom they could complain. The capital was too distant, and even if they went there, who would help them? He knew that even a king had no power to change the situation. Siddhartha had long understood the inner workings of the royal court. Every official was intent on protecting and fortifying his own power, not on alleviating the suffering of those in need. He had seen the powerful plot against each other, and he felt nothing but revulsion for politics. He knew that even his own father's authority was fragile and restricted. A king did not possessed true freedom, but was imprisoned by his position. His father was aware of many officials' greed and corruption, but was forced to rely on these same individuals to maintain the stability of his reign. Siddhartha realized that if he stood in his father's place, he would have to do the same. He understood that only when people overcame greed and envy in their own hearts would conditions change. And so his desire to seek a path of spiritual liberation was reignited. Yasodhara was bright and intuitive. She understood Siddhartha's longings, and she had faith that if Siddhartha resolved to find the path of liberation, he would succeed. But she was also quite practical. Such a search could last months, even years. In the meantime, sufferings would continue to daily unfold around them. And so she believed it was important to respond right away in the present moment. She discussed with Siddhartha ways to ease the suffering of the poorest members of society. She had been doing work like that for several years, and her efforts eased some of the people's misery and brought some measure of peace and happiness to her own heart as well. She believed that with Siddhartha's loving support, she could continue such work for a long time. From capital Vatu came pouring all manners of goods and servants to provide for the couple's summer needs. Siddhartha and Yasodhara sent home most of the servants, retaining only a few to assist them with the gardens, cooking, and housekeeping. And of course, they retained the services of Channa. Yasodhara organized their daily life as simply as possible. She personally entered the kitchen to direct the cooking of simple meals pleasing to Siddhartha, and she cared for his garments with her own hands. She sought Siddhartha's guidance concerning the relief projects she intended to continue when they returned to the capital. Siddhartha understood her need to engage in social action, and he never failed to express his support. Because of this, Yasodhara placed even deeper trust in her husband. But although Siddhartha understood the value of Yasodhara's work, he felt that her path alone could not bring true peace. People were entrapped not only by illness and unjust social conditions, but by the sorrows and passions they themselves created in their own hearts and minds. And if, in time, Yasodhara fell victim to fear, anger, bitterness, or disappointment, where would she find the energy needed to continue her work? Siddhartha had himself experienced suspicion, frustration, and pain when he saw how things worked in the palace and in society. He knew that the attainment of inner peace would be the only basis for true social work. But he did not confide these thoughts to Yasodhara because he feared that they would only cause her uncertainty and worry. When the couple returned to their winter palace, they entertained a constant stream of guests. Yasodhara welcomed family members and friends with great warmth and respect. But she was most attentive when Siddhartha spoke with them about philosophy and religion, and their relation to politics and society. Even while going back and forth to direct the servants, Yasodhara never missed a word of these conversations. She had hoped to discover among their friends some who may like to join her work for the poor, but few expressed interest in such pursuits. Most were more interested in feasting and having a good time. Yet Siddhartha and Yasodhara patiently received them all. In addition to Siddhartha, there was one other person who understood and wholeheartedly supported Yasodhara's efforts. Gotami, the Queen Mahaprajapati. The Queen was most attentive to her daughter-in-law's happiness, for she knew that if Yasodhara was happy, Siddhartha would be happy as well. But that was not the sole reason she supported Yasodhara's good work. Gotami was a woman of compassion, and from the first time she accompanied Yasodhara on a visit to a poor village, she understood at once the true value of Yasodhara's work. It was not just the material goods given to the poor, such as rice, flour, cloth, and medicine, but the kind glances, helping hands, and loving heart of one willing to respond directly to those who suffer. Queen Mahaprajapati was not like other women in the palace. She frequently told Yasodhara that women possessed as much wisdom and strength as men, and needed to shoulder the responsibilities of society also. While women did possess a special ability to create warmth and happiness in their families, there was no reason for them to remain only in the kitchen or in the palace. Gotami found in her daughter-in-law a woman with whom she could share true friendship. For, like herself, Yasodhara was thoughtful and independent. Not only did the Queen offer Yasodhara her approval, but she worked alongside Yasodhara as well. Chapter 10. Unborn Child. During this time, King Suddhodana expressed the desire to have Siddhartha spend more time at his side, so that he could instruct his son in political and courtly affairs. The prince was invited to attend many official meetings, sometimes alone with the king, at other times with the king's court. Siddhartha gave his full attention to these affairs, and he came to understand that the political, economic, and military problems that beset any kingdom had their roots in the selfish ambitions of those involved in politics. Concerned only with protecting their own power, it was impossible for them to create enlightened policies for the common good. When Siddhartha saw corrupt officials feign virtue and morality, anger filled his heart. But he concealed it, as he did not have any alternatives to offer. "Why don't you contribute ideas at court, instead of always sitting so silently?" King Suddhodana asked one day after a long meeting with several officials. Siddhartha looked at his father. "It is not that I haven't ideas, but it would be useless to state them. They only point to the disease. I do not yet see a cure for the selfish ambitions of those in the court. Look at Visamiti, for example. He holds an impressive amount of power at court, yet you know he is corrupt. More than once he has tried to encroach upon your authority, but you are still forced to depend on his services. Why? Because you know if you don't, chaos will break loose." King Suddhodana looked at his son silently for a long moment. Then he spoke. "Siddhartha, you know well that in order to maintain peace in one's family and country, there are certain things one must tolerate. My own power is limited, but I am sure that if you prepared yourself to be king, you would do far better than I have. You possess the talent needed to purge the ranks of corruption while preventing chaos in our homeland." Siddhartha sighed. "Father, I do not think it is a question of talent. I believe the fundamental problem is to liberate one's own heart and mind. I too am trapped by feelings of anger, jealousy, fear, and desire." Similar exchanges between father and son made King Suddhodana grow increasingly anxious. He recognized that Siddhartha was a person of unusual depth, and he saw how differently he and his son viewed the world. Still, he fostered the hope that over time Siddhartha would come to accept his role and fill it in a most worthy way. In addition to his duties at court and assisting Yasodhara, Siddhartha continued to meet and study with well-known Brahmins and monks. He knew that the pursuit of religion was not just the study of the Holy Scriptures, but included the practice of meditation to attain liberation for one's heart and mind, and he sought to learn more about meditation. He applied all that he learned in these studies to his own life in the palace, and he shared these insights with Yasodhara. "Gopa," Siddhartha liked to call Yasodhara affectionately, "perhaps you should also practice meditation. It will bring peace to your heart and enable you to continue your work for a very long time." Yasodhara followed his advice. No matter how busy her work kept her, she reserved time for meditation. Husband and wife often sat together silently. At such times, their attendants left them alone, and the couple asked their musicians and dancers to perform elsewhere. From the time he was small, Siddhartha had been taught the 4 stages of a Brahman's life. In youth, a Brahmin studied the Vedas. In the 2nd stage, he married, raised a family, and served society. In the 3rd stage, when his children were grown, he could retire and devote himself to religious studies. And in the 4th stage, released from every tie and obligation, a Brahmin could live the life of a monk. Siddhartha thought about it and concluded that by the time one was old, it might be too late to study the way. He did not want to wait that long. Why can't a person live all 4 ways at once? Why can't a man pursue a religious life while he still has a family? Siddhartha wanted to study and practice the way in the very midst of his present life. Of course, he could not refrain from thinking about famous teachers in distant places, such as Savatthi or Rajgaha. He was sure that if he could find a way to study with such masters, he would make much more progress. The monks and teachers he frequently met had all mentioned the names of certain great masters, such as Alara Kalama and Udaka Ramaputta. Everyone aspired to study with such masters, and each day Siddhartha felt his own desire grow ever more urgent. One afternoon, Siddhartha came home. Yasodhara, her face filled with grief. She did not speak to anyone. A young child she had tended for more than a week had just died. Despite all her efforts, she could not rescue the child from death's grasp. Overcome with sadness, she sat in meditation while tears streamed down her cheeks. It was impossible to hold back feelings. Siddhartha returned from a meeting at court, and she again burst into tears. Siddhartha held her in his arms and tried to console her. "Gopa, tomorrow I will go with you to the funeral. Cry now. It will lessen the pain in your heart. Birth, old age, sickness and death are heavy burdens each of us carries in this life. What has happened to the child could happen to any one of us at any moment." Yasodhara spoke between sobs. "Each day I see how true all the things you have said are. My two hands are so small compared to the immensity of suffering. My heart is constantly filled with anxiety and sorrow. O husband, please show me how I can overcome the suffering in my heart." Siddhartha embraced Yasodhara tightly in his arms. "My wife, I am seeking a path to overcome the suffering and anxiety in my own heart. I have seen into the situation of society and human beings. But despite all my efforts, I have not yet seen a way to liberation. Yet I feel that one day I will find a way for all of us. Gopa, please have faith in me." "I have never been without faith in you, my darling. I know that once you have resolved to accomplish something, you will pursue it until you succeed. I know that one day you will leave all your wealth and privileges behind in order to seek the way. Only, please, my husband, do not leave me just now. I need you." Siddhartha raised Yasodhara's chin and looked into her eyes. No, I won't leave you now. Only when... Yasodhara placed her hand over Siddhartha's mouth. "Siddhartha, please say no more. I want to ask you something. If you were to have a child with me, would you want it to be a boy or a girl?" Siddhartha was startled. He looked carefully at Yasodhara. "What are you saying, Gopa? Do you mean, can you be?" Yasodhara nodded. She pointed to her tummy and said, "I am so happy to be carrying the fruit of our love. I want it to be a boy who looks just like you, with your intelligence and your kind virtue." Siddhartha put his arms around Yasodhara and held her close. In the midst of his great joy, he felt the seeds of worry. Still, he smiled and said, "I will be just as happy if it is a boy or a girl, just so long as the baby has your compassion and wisdom." "Gopa, have you told Mother?" "You are the only one I have told. This evening I will go to the main palace and tell Queen Gotami. At the same time, I will ask her advice on how best to care for our unborn child. Tomorrow I will go to tell my own mother, Queen Pamita. I'm sure everyone will be very happy." Siddhartha nodded. He knew that his mother would pass the news on to his father as soon as she learned of it. The king would be overjoyed and would no doubt organize a great banquet to celebrate. Siddhartha felt the ties that bound him to life in the palace tightening. Dear friends, this is where we pause in our story. I wish you a peaceful night. Good night.